Welcome back, everybody. Our next speaker is the wonderful John Faisandier, and I've known John for about 5 years now, I think, and he's an amazing guy with an incredibly varied background. He has been a teacher, he's been a priest, he's worked in Tonga, so speaks Tongan. He has been heavily involved in psychodrama and has worked with people in the drug and alcohol rehab space. He is a serial entrepreneur. He is the founder of the Tough program, which is Thriving Under Fire, helping people to be able to deal with and handle their difficult emotions. And he's also co-founded with the wonderful Ahmed Bari an organisation called WASDA New Zealand, working in Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, all of these other sorts of countries, with people ranging from teenagers right through to CEOs in various companies. So it is fantastic to have you here today, John.
Thank you, Kathy. And it's lovely to be here and be part of this big project that you've got about Ignite Your Leadership.
Fantastic. And today, John, you're going to be talking to us about handling our emotions, managing those difficult emotions. And I know you're going to be talking primarily to the teachers, because for many of the teachers that are working in our school system, they're working with students who are really struggling. Many students are struggling at the moment, particularly with raised levels of anxiety, disruption, all of those sorts of things. But the strategies that you're going to be talking about are useful for anybody. I know, because I've seen them in action in so many different groups of people. So I'm really looking forward for you sharing those strategies today, and remembering that it will be in the context of the teachers, but anybody can use these strategies. So for anybody else listening as well, take them and put them into your life as well, because it will make a difference.
Yep, well, that's absolutely right. It's really interesting as I run a lot of workshops, and then people come, it's often in the workplace situation, that similar to even with teachers and principals, and many of them say, can I, I'm going to use this at home. And I tell people, this is my hidden agenda for running these workshops in the workplace, because you're the same person, whether you're at work, at home, in social settings, anywhere. And the same dynamic happens between people. And the same, in a classroom setting, let alone in a one-to-one setting in family or social.
Mm-hmm. And it works with people of no matter what age, doesn't it?
Absolutely, it does. I mean, there are implications even for babies, in this. It's not quite the same, but but the emotions are tremendously important to be acknowledged for the youngest baby, just newborn baby, let alone right through life and even into very old age, and with people even with dementia.
Fantastic. So today we're going to be talking about learning the skills that we need to listen to our minds and our bodies, so that we can always be at our best. Just before we start into those, John, questions that I'm asking every single person. The first question is, what do you see are the current challenges in our education system?
To me, what I see, the challenges, is that emotions get acknowledged. And this would be the teacher's emotions, that when things happen in the classroom, when students react or respond, let alone when colleagues do, emotions are present. I mean, emotions, they make life delicious, but they also make life challenging and difficult. And so, to me, the biggest the biggest challenge that I see for the education system is somehow to be able to allow people to experience their emotion without these becoming destructive.
Yes, and that's some of the work that I'm actually doing with teachers of preschool students, is helping people to be able to know what to do with their emotions appropriately, and being able to calm our bodies down. And that's so much of what you're doing with the wide range of people you're working with.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
fantastic. John, what do you wish you had learnt at school?
Probably that it is okay. Um, I suppose that people would really acknowledge what my process was, where I was struggling, where I was coming to grips with myself, the meaning of life, let alone some ideas. A lot of these things, they were sort of implied, but I had to do a lot of work after school, um, as in in my adult life, to learn really about the emotional life. Yeah, so that's what I would say probably, and in a sense, I would like to have learnt it in my family as well as at school. I mean, um, but even just learning it somewhere.
Mm. And so it's fantastic. We're going to be talking about what we're talking about today, about the emotions and about understanding those emotions and learning to listen to them so that we can live at our best, because we can use this in every single area of our lives. And that's one of the consistent messages that's come through every single speaker over the last 3 days, is that we are living life. It's not just content that needs to be taught in this particular thing. It's how do we prepare every single person that is in our school system for living their life with purpose and meaning. So, yeah, looking forward to hearing what you've got to say today.
Mm.
So, you talk about the Thriving Under Fire, the tough program. That's what you've created. That's what you've been spending the last quite a few years of your life really working with different people on. So, what is Thriving Under Fire?
Well, it really is a program about learning the skills to manage emotions. A lot of training programs, it started out as a customer service program, actually. And a lot of these programs people have been doing, they were taught this is what you need to say to the customer, or in this case, what you need to say to students. What so many of them miss out on is what's happening to you in this moment when somebody is upset or distressed or aggressive or angry, whatever. What I worked out was that until people learn to manage themselves and notice what happens to them when a difficult customer or difficult student responds, so I teach them, because they feel like they're under fire, is really where it came from. And how can you thrive in that environment? I learned this myself, particularly. You mentioned I worked in drug and alcohol rehabilitation. When people were sent to the group that I was running, it was quite a deep, intensive therapy group to deal with issues of their drinking and what triggered their drinking and drugging. And often it was early childhood trauma that they'd experienced. And in that moment where they confronted or came to meet and face up to some of those difficulties, they got incredibly scared, and that got often displayed in anger. I needed to learn how to calm myself down in those moments before I could work with those people. So that's really where I learned this myself. And then when I finished working in that area, I wanted to teach the rest of the world how to do this.
So why is managing your own emotions in this situation so important? Why is that the first step? Because it's the other person's issue, isn't it?
Well,
At least that's how we feel at that particular time.
yes, and
You're
in
looking
fact,
at that.
we can get very judgmental about the other person. They shouldn't speak to me like this. There's something wrong with them. Whatever however you phrase it, and that's because emotions are contagious. When somebody feels something, we feel it. We feel something as well in response. They're not necessarily exactly the same, but often they are. And this is really, um, first of all, being able to notice this. And so often we become judgmental of our own feelings. I shouldn't feel like this. If somebody is abusing me, one of the reaction might be, I want to hit this person, which is what does happen a lot in domestic violence. Whereas if I'm able to say, actually, I'm feeling intimidated, I'm feeling little, I'm feeling scared. Now, it's these emotions are the ones that people really need to start noticing in themselves without judgment, without being critical of themselves, and being much more being curious, really, and saying, how interesting, I'm feeling like this. I'm feeling I'm scared right now. I'm feeling embarrassed. I'm feeling shame, which is an even harder one to name. But whatever it is, that's the very first important step that is noticing and then taking steps to control this, which is what I teach, how you can actually manage that. So it's one thing to notice I feel this. Next thing, what can I do about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the managing the emotions, that importance of understanding what is happening and how you're feeling, the importance of managing that is that it can get out of control very, very quickly if we don't manage it, isn't it?
Absolutely. You know, when emotions stay in the unconscious, when we're not mindful of them, that's when they have huge power. But once we lift the lid, if you like, or reveal them or name them, then they have much less power. There's a little saying, you know, to name your emotions is to tame them. But for many people, they don't name them and they don't go in that area. And so these emotions become even more powerful. Um, yeah, so that's a very important first step, is to be conscious and to own them. Because when we don't own them, the other part about that is we project them onto the other person. And so a very common phrase we say is, you make me angry, you make me sad. Well, technically nobody makes me feel anything. These are my feelings, they belong to me. And so that would be one of the first bits of language to change for a start, is to get rid of the idea that you make me feel something. No, I feel this. Now, when you do that, I feel that's a fair enough statement, but it's more being able to say this feeling belongs to me.
And so one of the first steps of that, because many people actually don't use those languages around emotion very often during the day. And I've heard many people say that the emotions that they know are happy, sad, and angry, or certainly many 4-year-olds only know those emotions. And I've talked to adults who actually have very few more emotion words than happy, sad, angry, maybe a little frustrated, but they don't know what those other emotions feel like. So it can be really helpful to almost brainstorm a list of all of the different emotions that we can think of as a starting place, can't it?
Yes, well, it's true. And I mean, brainstorm or even Google list of feelings, because in some of my resources, you know, I've got 150 feeling words that people can look at, and they look at them and say, oh, I know all of those words. It's just they don't use them. They just use happy, sad, or angry, or you know, sometimes people just sad. Angry is sort of the common one. But for many, though, anger actually is a secondary emotion. And that is, it's one that'll cover over some of the other feelings where if I revealed them, I would appear more vulnerable. So anger can often be a way of avoiding some of these other feelings that make me more vulnerable. But it's so important to actually get below the anger and be able to name some of these other things that I am feeling.
Because it's really interesting working with groups as we've got this list of feelings, and then you can start thinking about, well, actually, how do they feel? And okay, that one actually does feel a little bit different than that. For example, nervous or embarrassed or nervous or worried. You know, there are slight differences within these things, and you're identifying the anger there. Often people can feel angry because they are not seen, they don't feel understood, and that can raise that feeling of anger.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you talk about strong emotions rather than negative emotions or positive emotions. One of the things I know you've said is that actually all emotions, they're just emotions. There's no good, there's no bad, they just are.
That's very true. And it's because emotions tell us something about our values. And when our values somehow are affected, we have an associated emotion. I mean, the most obvious one is when we love somebody and they die, we feel very sad, and if we love them a lot and they're very close to us, we feel even sadder, So you can, what our sadness tells us is how much we, in fact, love that person now that they've gone. But there are many other, same with joy, when we see somebody that we do love and they've come back, or we're spending time with them, we feel very good. And that tells us something about those values. Guilt is another important emotion that we feel, because that tells us when we've gone against some of our deeper values. If you, I don't know what you might tell an untruth to somebody, for whatever reason, and then afterwards you feel a bit guilty about it, because your value is actually, I'm a truthful person, but I did fudge the truth, or even I told an outright lie about that. And so it's important to notice these things and to say they're telling me something about my values.
Interesting. Okay, so we've been talking about some of these emotions, particularly those strong emotions. And I think our next important thing is to know how those emotions affect our brains. So can you tell us about that, please, John?
Yes. Well, in very simple terms, we've got this. You can think of, we've got three brains inside our brain: the reptilian brain, the mammalian brain, and the neocortex, the new part, which for humans is bigger, and this is where our rational thinking happens. Now, in the mammalian, the reptilian brain just keeps our body going. It also provides the hormones and the various other things that keep everything going, particularly adrenaline. Now, it's the mammalian brain in that part where there's a particular part of that brain called the amygdala. And when we have an emotional reaction to something, the amygdala fires up, particularly when it's defensive, when we're needing to be defensive. We get a flood of adrenaline and cortisol into our body so that we're ready for fight or flight. Now, the amygdala, because it's about our survival, that we're not going to, well, originally our ancestors not going to get eaten by nasty wild beasts in the savannah. This part of the brain is developed to be highly alert to any kind of danger. And nowadays, even somebody just saying no to us will activate this part of the brain. What it does, the amygdala takes a lot of the oxygen from the frontal cortex, the thinking part of the brain, and because it needs to use it, because it's got to be very active for survival. And that's when we become, technically, we become irrational. We're overly emotional. And the challenge now is, how can you change the way that the brain functions when this is happening? When somebody maybe comes in and says, there's something wrong with you, you're terrible, I don't like you. This part of the brain, the amygdala, hijacks the brain. So we don't think as well, we don't speak as well, we don't know what to say, can't think what to say, can't say it, and also we don't want to make a good relationship with that person. The mirror neurons shut down. So part of our brain literally shuts down, while the other part, this amygdala, is highly active, and that's the emotional, sometimes called the emotional brain in that system. So that's what happens in the brain. And our challenge then is, how can you change the way the brain works? And there's three things that are very useful, that be useful just for people to even to jot down. The first one, most obvious thing, even though we don't do it, is to breathe. Now, when we feel under attack, we breathe a lot from here. We want to get emergency breath, oxygen to the brain. So we breathe up here. This is not an emergency. Somebody telling you that you're stupid is not an emergency. It's if they've got a shotgun or a machete or something, some kind of like that, that's an emergency. You need quick oxygen because you've got to get out of there. But for most relationships, it's not an emergency. So you don't breathe from up here, you breathe from the belly down. And when you breathe, this slows you down. It affects the vagus nerve, which helps calm you. There's a whole bunch of things that it does, but also it gets more oxygen into this neocortex, the thinking part of the brain. That's the first thing. Second thing to do is to name your feelings to yourself, usually to yourself. And that's neuroscientists would say this is probably the most powerful thing you can do, is to name your feeling to yourself. So it fits in with what we've been saying. Almost doesn't matter actually whether you say sad, mad or bad, or feeling. We don't have to, at this point, we don't have to get too precise, because what it does, first of all, this is my feeling. I'm feeling like this, rather than you make me feel mad. Whereas I'm feeling really mad about this. So it takes away, it takes you away from projecting this onto somebody else. But it also activates the language center of the brain. And so it's kind of like a pump, primes the pump, and gets language going again. And that has a very strong effect. I encourage people just to try it. The next time you feel kind of worked up about something, see if you can name that and notice, because you will notice something very definite happening that you calm down. The third thing is actually to get that brain going again is ask yourself a complex question. And the complex question that we suggest is, I wonder what else might be happening behind that person that's getting them to act this way. Usually, even though they might be saying you have done something wrong, that's a stronger reaction. You can't have possibly done that much wrong for them to react so strongly. But realizing there are many things in their life that gets them upset. And what we've got right now, with a whole year of COVID-19 and people locked down and all sorts of stresses, everybody's got a lot of extra stress going on. So think of those three things: breathe, name your feelings, think of what's happening around what else is happening to the other person, will help you calm down.
Yeah, so this is really useful for anybody that we're working with, isn't it? And especially with the number of people who trauma is becoming more and more and more recognized. And we're seeing in our schools the result of trauma that people have experienced.
Yes.
From domestic violence or from so many different sources, if you like.
Yes, absolutely. And some people need more of this than others. And partly it's related that they don't get enough in their early years. And this is why I think it's wonderful, the work you're doing, teaching teachers how to develop emotional intelligence in preschool, early childhood education. However, through life, some people do need more acknowledgement of what's their distress and so on. So anyhow, this is what we do to calm ourselves down. And probably the other part of all of this is, what can you do that would assist the other person to calm down? So once you calm yourself down, this is what is the challenge.
So how can we help them calm down when they're in that? Because they're highly emotional by this stage. They can be really fired up, can't they? And so it's almost like what we say next can make them go even higher, or it can bring them down. So we have a choice right in that moment. If we've breathed and we've taken a big deep breath and we've acknowledged to ourselves that we're feeling a little overwhelmed at the moment, or a bit agitated, or whatever it is, the word that we're choosing,
yes.
I wonder what's going on for that person.
Absolutely. Now this is the crucial moment, and it's really it works much better when you are calmed down. So you've calmed yourself down, and then the key to this is to somehow acknowledge what they are feeling. Chris Voss, who wrote is a hostage negotiator, he calls this labeling. But you do it tentatively, but I would just say naming or acknowledging their emotion, saying something like, it seems like you are really upset at the moment. Seems like this is very important to you. Seems like you've thought a lot about this. Seems like you have been inconvenienced by what's happened. Seems like you're really worried about your marks. It seems like you're under a lot of pressure at the moment. Now, these things, simply by acknowledging them and not saying too much more, that person will feel they have been acknowledged. They feel that you get them. It's not just an intellectual exercise. It's really getting people, and you do it. There's a lovely image of what empathy is, where you see somebody they're down in a pit, and in this moment, you're not standing up on at the rim of this, looking down at them and saying, "Oh, you're in the hard." You actually, in your mind, it's as if you go down in a ladder and you're standing with them, so that you will actually feel something of this yourself. This is not just a kind of a technique or something that you can just do and not feel. This is about really being with people, and when they experience you being with them, even just for a few moments, and you're able to acknowledge what might be going on for them, this will do an awful lot to calm them down. And this is really the key, and it's what I learned working with patients in the drug and alcohol rehabilitation hospital that I worked in, that when I could get with them and say, this is pretty big for you, isn't it? Or this is pretty scary. Something like that, they calmed down, and then we were able to do the work that they needed to do. And this would be one of the things in the classroom where, I was a classroom teacher myself for a number of years. And I know back then, where I didn't really understand this fully, in that moment when a child would, express himself or do something like that, my inclination was to say, be quiet, sit down, don't do this. Whereas now, if I think about this, it's about saying, right, you're worried about something. You're having difficulty with this. This is not easy for you, is it? Any of those things. Just acknowledge that simply. And then when you notice they calm down, then you can say, what is it exactly? Or, what can I teach you? Yeah.
So by acknowledging that emotion, you're giving them the space to be able to then start to engage their own brain, because while we're fired up and our brains are going all over the place, actually their brains are as well. So by giving them that space to be able to calm down, then they also, even if we can say, just take a moment and we can talk about it when you're ready, type thing, can really help in that situation.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, we realize that for children, their development and their impulse control and they haven't learned the same skills, they haven't had the same practice. So, we need to realize that this might take just a bit longer for them. But even for many of the adults that I've worked with, they also haven't had a lot of practice at this. So it can, all of us are struggling. And even for myself now, there's moments where I've got to really apply what I teach to myself in situations, and I notice this particularly towards the end of the year when I get tired, after 2020 was, such a big year, just all of those feelings. So I need to learn how to, or keep practicing about calming myself.
And that's one of the things, isn't it, is that we all need to practice it. For people that are older, they've had many more years of ingrained behavior, ingrained responses. And so those connections are much, much stronger. And so to learn a new pathway can actually be a lot harder. Whereas when you've got the younger children, you've actually got, and we were hearing about the teenage brain and the possibilities there of so many different possibilities. So that's a different way of looking at it, isn't it? That this is an incredible opportunity to learn new ways that will be much, much more helpful than the patterns of the past.
Yes, it is. I mean, it's a challenge for everybody. It's a challenge for teenagers for their particular reasons and developmental reasons. And it's a challenge for older people to change what has been habitual. What I do know is that when people start doing this, the results are so positive that they end up doing it more. It's not something that it becomes a terrible tedium and a draw. It's kind of like, I did some research in one of my early workshops with bank tellers, and at the end of the program, they reported, yes, I can do this more. After 4 weeks, they were doing it even more, and so this was great, and they're saying it's very good. Then the bank said, yeah, but there will be some drop off. Let's do another evaluation at 4 months. And after 4 months, instead of seeing a drop off of this learning, there was even more reporting of doing this. And that's because it has its own rewards, that when people were doing this, making this kind of response and managing their own emotions and responding to their customers, they come, this works, we're going to do this. And so they were doing it, the reported they do it even more after 4 months. So I just encourage people to try this. Notice what happens when you say it, even though you might think you're being a bit false in saying these things, and the other person's going to easily see that you're doing some technique. Mostly they won't. And then if they do pull you up and say that's just a technique, you just be real with them and say, look, even though it's a technique, I'm just kind of learning this, but what I do want to have is a good relationship with you, and I want to be able to, either be a good teacher for you, or I want to be a good partner for you, or a good father or mother or child, whatever it is. You just say, but I'm learning, but I do see that you don't like what I just said, and then that itself is acknowledging their emotion.
Absolutely. And so all of these things are about relationships, aren't they? And that's what our education system needs to be based on. It's what it is based on. It's what life in our families are based on, is about these relationships, is about connection. And so the skills that you're talking about here, they change lives. They change lives, not just in a work context, but in every single area of our lives. And that's why I think you're seeing that in that upgrowth, if you like, in the work that you did with those bank tellers, because they were seeing it and they were using it. And the more that they saw those positive results, they were willing to practice more. So thinking about the implication for the classroom, I think one of the things that can happen right at the beginning of a class, is that a student is late. Now, as a teacher, we've got two options, haven't we? The first option is to go, why are you late? The second option, after listening to you here, is to take a big breath and go, was it a tough morning today?
That's right. Yes. Great you could make it. You've probably had a bit of trouble getting here, have you? Or sometimes it's really difficult to get here on time, isn't it? And, when you develop that kind of relationship with students and create that culture in the classroom, people will want to be there early because, it's a good place to come, and you're making that sort of a response. The other thing that I do notice also in classrooms, where children throughout the day, whether they're, you're with the same group the whole day, or whether you're in a situation, particularly in high schools, where the students move around, and but even just taking 1 minute at the beginning of the session to say, okay, let's just do a breathing exercise for 1 minute. We're going to just breathe slowly and breathe from your belly, and you will notice in the space of 1 minute or even less how the mood of the calmness comes in, where you're encouraging all the students just to breathe from the belly. Then you can get on with whether you're teaching maths or science or English or social studies or any other kind of thing. You can get on with that, but you will notice this will impact the students. Give them that minute, and it's 1 minute spent doing this will save you many minutes of all sorts of other difficulties throughout the session, the time together. So that's as well as being positive towards students and saying that, yep, it's good that you got here, and welcoming them into making, really creating a culture of welcome and acknowledgement. Then this is what I would highly recommend you do, because it will help them to calm down. You might even be able to say, and as you're breathing, name what you're feeling to yourself. That would be, oh, that's a good idea, and you can just say that, and whether they write it down on a piece of paper or just actually name it to themselves, and then you get on with the classroom, get on with your class.
Yeah, because some days are harder than others, and some days we can feel calm, but what we're trying to create together is calm spaces where we can be and we can do and we can learn alongside each other, because then we can create a better world together.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you so much, John, for sharing your knowledge today around the TOUGH program and around how you have helped so many people have better relationships and better lives through understanding this stuff.
Well, it's been a delight to chat with you today, Kathy, about this. I mean, as you can see, and because you've seen, I'm passionate about this. This is my life's work, and I want the whole world to learn this, so that we do this will lead to world peace, and it's beginning here today.
Yes, absolutely. So we're talking here in New Zealand, but I also have worked with John in Bangladesh, Malaysia, Nepal, and we are seeing the benefits of this with people right from teenagers right through to people in their 60s, from putting these processes, if you like, into place. And when we go back 3 or 4 months later and ask them what's changed, the breathing has been the biggest key in this, isn't it? The breathing and the acknowledging the emotions.
Yeah.
So very exciting. Thank you very much, John.
Okay, thank you.